So hello, we are live. This is a relegation special. I'm Andrew Musgrove. I cover Newcastle up in Chronicle Live. I'm joined by a selection of writers whose teams are also right in the middle of this relegation fight, this fight for safety. If you follow your teams, you will know these chaps, but they're going to introduce themselves to those who don't know them. First, Scott, we'll go with yourself.
I'm Scott from Football.London, covering Fulham this season.
My name's Rich Mills. I cover Brighton for Sussex Live.
I'm Joe Chapman. I cover West Bromwich Albion for Birmingham Mail, Birmingham Live, and we are clinging on by our fingertips.
Yes, you guys are, but Newcastle couldn't manage to beat you on Sunday. We'll get onto that in just a moment, because I think what you witnessed on Sunday with Newcastle might give Scott and Rich some hope that their teams at least might survive, maybe at the expense of Newcastle. We'll go around and we'll start with Scott first, and we'll talk about whether you feel Fulham are favourites to go down, and then we'll go on to Rich and then myself with the same question. But Scott, right now, looking at it, do you think Fulham are favourites to go down?
So I think when you look at the table, obviously they're the team in it. They've played a game more as well, so maybe from that perspective you think so. But momentum is just going completely the opposite direction at the minute. It's been such a long time where Fulham have played quite well. Now they're starting to pick up points as well as putting in those good performances. And I think there's probably just that hint from Fulham supporters and perhaps everybody else as well that they might just do enough to stay up despite looking out of it maybe 6 games ago.
What about you, Rich? How do you feel Brighton fans are looking at this relegation battle?
They are bricking it, and so am I. It's basically from a month or so ago when they beat Liverpool, when it was still a cool new thing to do. They were 10 points clear of the relegation zone. They were on a 6-match unbeaten streak after following a point against Burnley, and since then they've drawn 2 and they've lost 3, and they've lost the very influential players of Solly March, the left wing back, and Adam Webster in the space of a game or so, and their form has just taken a nosedive, and now they're just it's squeaky bum time, and they're in 17th, just ahead on goal difference. So it's a very, very nervy period, and it would be interesting to see if we could talk about this at maybe some point, just about the kind of contrast in the fixtures coming up, because that's obviously going to be key. But I still think Brighton can turn it around, but it's anyone's guess at the moment.
I personally am just as worried as you guys, because Newcastle can't find a win for love nor money. They can't score goals. As Joe will remember from a few days ago, it was a horrible game against West Brom, and yet West Brom, I think 5 more minutes, probably might have really tested Newcastle, and maybe come away with all 3 points. I am worried. I know Newcastle United fans are worried. You look on social media and you don't have to go very far to see that fear that it's history repeating itself with what happened with Steve McClaren all those years ago, and maybe the hierarchy haven't learned their lesson. Joe, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question given the predicament West Brom find themselves in. Do you believe West Brom can get themselves out of this scrap at the expense of, unfortunately, one of us 3?
My hopes are fading pretty quickly after the last couple of games, because I think that, as Allardyce himself said, the Newcastle game was a must-win. So when you pencil in a certain game to be a must-win and you don't win that game, and you've still got 10 games to go, where do you go from there? It's a difficult one to overcome there, really, in terms of the mental challenge, really, that you've not clawed back those extra points that you needed. You've got to bear in mind that not only have Albion got a big points gap between themselves and Brighton and Newcastle, but also the goal difference is awful as well. So that will definitely count against them. Even if they were to get those points back, they could still go down, on goal difference. So they need that basically an extra point. We're having a mini Brighton-esque period ourselves in that we just can't score. Albion have really very quickly, really, in the last kind of 4 or 5 weeks have learned how to defend again, having conceded goals for fun for most part of the season, hence the awful goal difference. And now that we're actually giving ourselves a platform on which to go and win games by keeping those clean sheets, we just can't score, and that's been the real problem. And it cost them against Everton in the week when they were the better side. And I do think that despite Newcastle having a full week to prepare for the game at the Hawthorns, Albion was still the better side over 90 minutes, despite a pretty slow start. And for whatever reason, they just can't seem to that Midas touch in the penalty area at the moment. It just won't go in, and draws just aren't any good to them at all at the moment.
It's interesting you mentioned the goal difference, because if you look at Fulham, Brighton and Newcastle, it's Newcastle that would worry, given that they're on -17, Brighton -8 and Fulham -11. That is, I think, one of the things that is worrying Newcastle United fans. With what you saw, Joe, on Sunday, Newcastle West Brom, do you think there's cause for optimism for the likes of, for the Fulham fans and for the Brighton fans?
My question would be, if Newcastle aren't going to kind of go at West Brom, if they're not going to turn up at the Hawthorns with an intention to win, it didn't really strike me as an obvious intention to win. And Bruce kind of almost backed that up after the game by suggesting, well, at least we haven't lost. That was kind of the attitude. Where are they going to go and win games, really, between now and the end of the season? I know they've got to go to Burnley and they've got to go to Brighton, but surely you've got to approach, from a Newcastle perspective, surely you've got to approach a game to West Brom as a game to just go and win. I know they haven't got the players in attack that they would otherwise have at this moment in time because of injuries, but still, really, I mean, you can count on one hand the opportunities that Joe Linton or Chris Willock had in front of goal. And as I say, I think over the course of the piece, Albion, despite having played 2 days earlier, were the better side and finished stronger. So that would be my concern, really, is how in the meantime, and I know there's going to be a couple of weeks international break, etc., where do the goals come from with Newcastle?
Rich, I'm just wondering, because Newcastle aren't playing well. They're not scoring goals. They don't, they're not deserving to win games. Whereas I think from the outside looking in, when I watch Brighton, for instance, just against Leicester the other day, they were good value. And yes, they lost the game, but really, again, they had a good showing. And I look at it and I think, is that actually a bit harder to take when you're playing well but you're not getting the results than it is when you're playing badly and not getting the results?
I think that's a good point. Graham Potter has always said, he'd be more worried if they weren't creating those chances. But it's just, the problem is when it's time and time again, they've dominated teams, they've had more chances, way more possession. Obviously, that's not as important. But if it keeps happening, that it can't just be unlucky. Because, if you look at their, I don't say too much stalled by the kind of expected points and stuff like that, but the expected points table, Brighton would be 5th on 45 points, and they're currently on 27, and they've scored 27 goals in 27 games, and their XG for goals would be 41. So they're underperforming in key areas. But yeah, the fact that it just keeps on happening is worrying. Jamie Carragher, I think a while ago, talks about teams needing to have a plan B, and Everton showed that in their win against Liverpool, when I think they put 2 strikers up top, and they just changed the back three a bit more, and they changed the role of Rodriguez a bit. So, but I just don't feel that Brighton have a plan B if they can't break teams down who sit back, and that's the way that you can beat Brighton. If you sit back, get men behind the ball, and then hit them on the counter. Whereas Brighton, if they are a bit more pragmatic, which is what they've done in their pretty much 5 of their wins, the only game that they won this season when they had more possession was against Newcastle. Every other win, they've happily surrendered the ball and then just been more intelligent. But yeah, I just worry that there's no plan B. And what's the saying? Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. But I haven't seen anything different, so I do worry.
You could apply that to Newcastle as well. Scott, it sounds strange that, I'm saying here we're fearing, but when you look at the table, Newcastle are above Brighton. Which team do you think Scott Parker is targeting? Is there a team, or is it all about what Fulham do and then we'll see what the final outcome is, or has he got a team in his sights?
I think with Scott Parker, he's all about Fulham, and I think that's been the situation all throughout the season. Really early on, probably in October, he talked about Fulham being comfortable with being in around that relegation zone. That's what the season was going to be. And I think that's a different point to perhaps Newcastle and Brighton, where maybe a lot of people do expect them to be in those positions, but there's not a reality of this is what's happening. And everything has always been about Fulham, and he says at every single press conference about the team improving, putting the hard work on the training ground. And I think there's a really interesting kind of like dichotomy between Fulham and Newcastle, where Steve Bruce will perhaps, rather than pointing on what Newcastle are going to do, he'll say there's 6 teams involved in the relegation battle, and kind of pushes against that. And I think it's all kind of like about where the momentum's going. And Fulham, obviously, kind of the defense is improving. They're still not scoring goals, which isn't ideal, like everyone. And I think the moment Callum Wilson got injured for Newcastle, even taking out Almer and St. Maximin, it just changed the whole sort of narrative of the relegation battle, because that's what Newcastle had over these other teams, even though Newcastle haven't scored as many goals. And it's going to make a big difference, I think.
100%. I mean, for you, covering Fulham, which team are you more worried about? Are you more worried about Newcastle suddenly finding a bit of form, or do you look at Brighton and think Brighton are the team that are probably going to pull away? I mean, which side do you fear is going to get out of this, and then it's going to be maybe a final day shootout down at Craven Cottage between Newcastle and Fulham, perhaps?
Yeah, I think because of that final day, I think Brighton's always the worry of like making themselves safe, because Fulham just need to stay close enough to Newcastle, and they do have that chance to beat Newcastle on the final day. And I think out of the bottom end teams, Fulham have struggled against the likes of Burnley. Kind of both teams struggled a bit in the game against Brighton, but Newcastle feels like a game Fulham can win. And I think Fulham were a little bit unlucky with that penalty decision in December. And I know they'll see that as points dropped. So yeah, I think, again, just because of everything coming out of Newcastle at the minute as well, Fulham seem quite united, where it's a bit fractious. I'm not sure of the situation at Brighton or West Brom and how their dressing rooms are doing, but yeah, it just feels a lot more positivity from elsewhere. And I think Newcastle are that one that everybody's starting to worry about dropping down into the relegation zone.
I mean, Fulham's run has been just absolutely brilliant. I mean, they've only won 3 games, in 15, but the 9 draws has been really keen. They've not lost games or that many games, which has been important, I think, to build that little bit of momentum, small steps. Whereas you look at, Brighton, you look at Newcastle and West Brom, the contrast is stark. I mean, Newcastle 2 wins in 16, 4 draws. Brighton have got 7 draws and 3 wins. Fulham deserve to be, just deserve to be where they are in terms of they've caught up, and they fully deserve to be based on their form and improvement over the last couple of months. Yeah,
it's been weird. Obviously, they've been in the relegation zone for a long time, but it's hard to think of moments where they've had bad games. I said there has been a couple. I know they struggled against Burnley, but they have just this ability through the kind of sturdiness of the defence just to always be in a game. There'll be frustrations where they haven't quite got a draw, haven't quite got a win, but they always keep themselves within touch and distance where a goal can give them that 3 points, like against Liverpool at the weekend. And I think that win they got against Everton a few weeks ago came at a really key time, because everybody was starting to, I think, worry a little bit there, with the gap starting to open up, and that just kind of changed the tone as, we can get 3 points. Josh Madger, obviously new in, scored a couple of goals. And like I say, it's just these moments where kind of hope was waning, but then all of a sudden it's right back in. And I think it's been really interesting just to think that, whether it be a month ago or so, it felt like the relegation zone was done. I know, talking to friends, it was just like it would take something ridiculous now for anyone of the bottom 3 to stay up, and it happened a lot quicker than anybody perhaps thought. That it's all really compressed. Obviously, West Brom have a bit of a job to do, but having seen what's happened from a 10-point gap not that long ago, you couldn't rule anything out, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, the gap is it's 8 points there. Joe, how important is this weekend for West Brom? If they lose, is that game over, do you think?
Well, I mean, it feels like every week's a must-win now. To be honest with you, they've got to go to Crystal Palace, who are a very strange side. Really, I've seen them a number of times this season where they've been well beaten. Burnley beat them out of sight. Really, they've obviously got Wilfried Zaha back, and that's a huge boost. I don't think there's a club in the Premier League who relies on a player more than Zaha. When you look at how they get on with him and compare that to how they get on without him. So they've got to go and win at Palace. They're on 18 points. So, I mean, I think they probably need to double that tally to have any kind of chance, really. Maybe even more than that. The one thing that strikes me just at the moment, we're talking about unity and Newcastle having a lack of it, is that Albion seem to have that at the moment. I think there's a case that before a ball was kicked, there was such little experience in this squad of having played in the Premier League before. I mean, you could count on one hand the amount of players that had played regularly in the Premier League, most of them with West Brom, the relegation season the last time. So they're a club that I don't think had a huge amount of expectation before a ball was kicked. I don't think the fan base did. So therefore, it's not that kind of huge, disastrous kind of feeling towards, they're hurtling towards relegation in the way that Newcastle or even Brighton, who have had a good couple of years in the Premier League now, would maybe have that same feeling of. So in that respect, there's a little bit of pressure off, really, now that they've come through the last few weeks. And again, I think even as recently as a month ago, it was a case of, well, that's it, we're done. Then they have that little period where they pick up 5 points in 3 games and think, oh, maybe we're just about staying in touch. The failure to beat Newcastle was really galling, actually, because I know, and there was a lot of players at the end of that game that you could see as they made their way off the pitch who knew exactly that was an enormous opportunity missed, perhaps one that they absolutely had to take. Beat Palace, going to 21 points, and they've got this very weird period where they're not in the FA Cup and they've got an international break, so they don't play for 3 weeks. You don't want to be sitting on a defeat going into that period without a game. So beat Palace, then, I mean, what do you do then? You're kind of kicking your heels for a few weeks, and then they have really got a pretty tough run in on paper, to be honest. I mean, they've got to go to Chelsea, and they've got to play Leicester and Liverpool, Villa and Wolves as well, who will probably be on the beach, but ultimately aren't going to give them anything because they're local rivals. They've got to go to Ellen Road on the last day, and they're probably going to have about 10,000 fans in that, hopefully. So it's a big ask, I think, at this moment in time.
Newcastle play Villa on Friday. It's a big game. I think Villa would be favourites going into that, but it's a winnable game if you look at it on paper, especially after what Fulham did to Liverpool over the weekend. But Rich, I mean, Brighton versus Southampton is a huge game for you guys. If they lose that, what's your feeling?
Well, I think it's an intriguing prospect just because these are the two chokers of the division. I was surprised to see that Southampton have dropped 18 points from winning positions and Brighton are 17. So it's just like, no, you have it. No, you have it. So it'll be interesting to see who wins that one. I think Jermaine Gina said something about the way to beat Southampton is if you can match them for a certain amount of time, then you can maybe for like half an hour, then you're okay. So I think the first kind of half an hour or so, or 45 minutes will be key. Both teams will probably come out all guns blazing, but then, yeah, we shall see. But Brighton have won 4 of their 5 games on the road. So they're definitely a more tough prospect. But I think it'll be interesting. I still don't know if the teams are slightly above. So there's Burnley, there's Southampton, Crystal Palace. I don't know if they're. I mean, a win or so, and they may be safe. But just if you bring maybe one of those guys back down, then they kind of who knows what will happen. It'll be a real pressure cooker. So, but yeah, I think if Brighton don't get anything from that, I still don't think it'll be that bad because, I mean, for example, Fulham obviously played Man City and there's still quite a gap, no offence, Joe, to West Brom. So I think the real key is the next week, Brighton, Newcastle at the Amex. That is just before the international break. That is a monster tie. So And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Wilson's out for that game maybe, and then St Maximin and Almiron, and I think their record with them is significantly better. So if Brighton don't get anything from these next 2 games, I really, really am worried. But if they can get a couple of points, then I think it's okay.
How do Brighton fans, go into games? Because at the moment, Newcastle fans, they're not confident that they can beat even West Brom. No disrespect, Joe, and they'll not be confident of winning against Villa or Brighton. I don't think so. How do Brighton fans approach games, and how do they feel about Graham Potter? Is he under pressure? Or has he still got the backing of the fans, even though they are fighting for safety?
So to your first question, I think going into games, a lot of fans generally feel that the team that they put out on the whole is some of the strongest that they've had during their time in the Premier League. There's people like Ben White who has been linked with Chelsea and Spurs and Liverpool and whatnot. And then there's Yves Bissouma, who's been linked with Arsenal and so on, with Tarrant Lamptey. So they've got, a lot of exciting young players. So the expectations, especially early on the season, were quite high, and then they dropped with their kind of long run. I mean, they've only won once at the Amex this season. That was the 1-0 win over Spurs. Previously, they hadn't won in the Amex in the Premier League since June. So they really, few and far between wins-wise. So it's been, up and down season in terms of expectations. And then in terms of Graham Potter, there's an interesting, I think, schism in the fan base of fans loving the way that Brighton now play. I think during the end of the Chris Hughton tenure, people thought it really wasn't pretty to watch. And now that, they were so happy with the way they play. But I think I saw a statistic that actually said Chris Hughton now has a better win percentage, or other way around, sorry. Graham Potter has a worse win percentage than Chris Hughton did. So, I mean, are Brighton any better? I don't know. He got them to their highest ever points total last year with 41 points and 15th. But, I mean, if they get relegated and they play pretty football, it's not great. So, yeah.
That's the argument that I think is sometimes thrown at Newcastle fans. What do we want? What do we want? Do you want to play well and get beat, then get relegated, a bit like Bournemouth did? Do you want to have this style and identity? But I do kind of look at Brighton. I do think it's going to click eventually, and I think Newcastle fans look at Newcastle and they just can't see if they get a result, it's going to be a bit lucky. It's going to be against the runner player, perhaps. That at the moment is where the mood lies, and that is not good heading into this fight for survival. Whereas you look at Fulham, Scott, and Scott Parker's got the backing. The fans seem to like him. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, you're well in there. So, but from the outside looking in, he looks like he's got the support. The players are full of confidence. The messages he's sending out in the press conference and what have you. I've seen Newcastle fans, saying we'd love a bit of that. So, how important is that element? Off the pitch, the support he's got going into this battle.
Yeah, I think it's really big. I think at times over the last 2 seasons, despite obviously Fulham getting promoted last year, there has been some frustration with Parker and the kind of quality of the player, because there's been some nice football, but scoring goals has been an issue for a long time, and those kind of exchanges in the final areas have been something that people would point to have been a poor side of Parker's time there. But you listen to the players getting interviewed after the matches and they're talking about Parker's belief, and that's all that's drummed into them all the time. And I just think slowly but surely Fulham are a team that's in Parker's mould. They'll put the work in. They do have some quality as well. And like I said, they think they can take on anyone, and perhaps they will lose some points at times because of that. But they're never out of a game until the final whistle's been blown, and like I said, they'll commit. And I think just having that attitude is going to make a big difference. I think Man City next is going to be really tough. That's one of the few times where they've kind of looked a bit outclassed, where Man City are just a bit too intelligent in their movement. But beyond that, I think despite having 6 or 7 loan players in and it being quite a new team, I think they've all bonded through the situation. And there's a lot of players playing in the Premier League for the first time, so they haven't got experience of being relegated before, despite Fulham getting relegated not that long ago. So there's not too many demons, and they fancy it.
We've got Martin Smith here who says it would be so Fulhamish if Fulham beat Man City on Monday. I suppose they'll go in that full of confidence. They beat Liverpool deservedly and should have beaten Spurs. So there's definitely that kind of wave of optimism around Craven Cottage. I do have this fear though of it getting to the final day, and it's between Newcastle and Fulham, and Mitrovic, who has not looked like the player he did at the start of the season, coming off the bench and grabbing the goal, which sends Newcastle down. And that is a scenario that's playing round and round in my head. But I really hope it doesn't go down to the final day, because I wouldn't be backing Newcastle to win that. I guess just want to ask you guys, in terms of when you look at Newcastle, and Rich, we'll go to you first. When you look at Newcastle and you see the pressure Steve Bruce is under, the off-field, what shall we describe it as, drama, chaos, do you look at that and think, that's an added advantage to the likes of Brighton, to the likes of Fulham, and maybe even to the likes of West Brom?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one thing that Graham Potter always, I think, emphasises that, similar to what Scott said, there's always trying to improve and work on the training ground, but it does seem like a happy camp. I think things off the field surely can't help. And when you've also got key players missing, that's just another big blow. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. The thing is, though, with Brighton, it just so often you just they maybe take the lead, and then you just think, can they hold on? But they could just never get that second goal, and that's where the worry always is. And then it's almost just like deja vu, like dominate games and then just get punished. So I wouldn't even be surprised if Newcastle just came and nicked a goal. But I still think over the course of the next 10 or so games, I think Brighton may just be okay.
I'm just looking here at Brighton's running. So Manchester United, Everton, Chelsea. I mean, them 3 games are tough, one after the other. And then you finish with West Ham, Man City, Arsenal, the final 3 games. I mean, that sounds to me like a tough one. I know you've got to play every one, and I'm not really a fan of looking at the fixtures and using it as an excuse. But nevertheless, I mean, they are tough games to have, one after the other.
For sure, but I mean, I think the results in terms of the bottom half, like as I said, I think earlier, Brighton, I think, have only beaten Newcastle. They just don't beat teams around them. So, and they've beaten Aston Villa, they've beaten Spurs, they've beaten Liverpool, and they've beaten Leeds. And I think one thing I noticed from the Leeds game is that kind of their, full guns blazing approach did sort of suit Brighton. So if I look at some of the games there, we've got Sheffield United away, Leeds at home, Wolves away, I think, and then obviously Newcastle and Southampton. So I still think there's enough opportunities there to pick up points. But yeah, you really don't want to be, chasing the guys maybe in the relegation zone, having to play West Ham, Man City, and Arsenal. That's when panic stations will really hit him.
For you guys, Joe, I mean, is it game by game? It has to be looked at.
Yeah, I think so. I think Palace is the sole focus now. It's quite easy to, I think, compartmentalise that, because you're going to have the international break and that FA Cup weekend as well. So there'll be a lot of interested eyes from West Brom, at least, watching that game against that game between Brighton and Newcastle. Just because that could still have a bearing. You still are going to pay attention to what's going on around you. I know Allardyce is the kind of man who would discourage his players from paying attention to scores and league tables, and just saying, well, it's not even going to matter if you do what you have to do. And up until now, they've shown signs that they can compete at this level. I think they've only won one away game this season. That was at Wolves, and that was a pretty bizarre game. So they're going to have to go and produce something at Crystal Palace. We know all about Roy Hodgson as well down at Albion. So I think they're safe as well, aren't they? They're out of the question. They're out of the picture, definitely, without doubt. Even though there's a few murmurings of discontent down there. So again, it's the kind of game that you think to yourself, Palace aren't going anywhere fast. They're not going down. They're not going to go any higher in the league table. I don't think so. Can you go and show that extra desire that Palace may be lacking, possibly? If you can win that game, then it's Chelsea away after that. And so, as you know, and as speaking to guys at Everton and Palace as well, Allardyce does like to kind of target certain matches, more winnable games. Chelsea away probably won't tick that box, but after that, then you look at games against Leicester. I mean, you don't know where Leicester are going to be at that moment in the season and where they're going to be in their Champions League hunt. So you're right. It is coming back to your point. I think game by game, go and beat Crystal Palace, and then that might just alert a few clubs above them, thinking, well, actually, there is one of the two clubs that we deem to be dead below us are actually still, relatively alive.
Scott, we mentioned there, obviously, Fulham play City over the weekend, but then, Leeds, Villa, Wolves, Arsenal. But I read the games that Fulham have got to come, and I look at them and I think the way they performed against the likes of Spurs and against the likes of Liverpool, Scott Parker must be drilling his team to go into that game without any fear. Escapes my memory the midfielder's name who spoke after the game against Liverpool. Harrison
Reed.
That's the one. I knew you'd know. And I was just blown away by his comments. We go out to win, not to draw, not to get anything else, to win. So yeah, I mean, I'm looking at them games, and I just assume that the mantra must be we're Fulham and we're here to win this game.
Yeah, I think that's just what it sounds like, and it's coming from a lot of players. And I think what really kind of signalled that is at times Fulham they changed to a back five in November, and that's when they beat Leicester. Then they kept that, and then it got to the stage where Fulham, no doubt about it, needed to win games, and then they went to the back four and put more players up the pitch, and then they beat Everton. I think all the wins are coming against like phenomenal teams. So kind of taking advantage of moments where they play a team who's supposedly lesser or in and around it, that's going to be where that's really crucial. But they have shown their ability to kind of adapt to the situation, perhaps a little bit late sometimes. I know that's something you kind of feel strongly about with Newcastle, that perhaps they're not changing enough and adapting to what has happened to them. I'd be really curious his name's gone. Is it Graham Jones that's came in? Has he made any difference? Was there any point to that? Or
well, he came in and performed really well against Everton. They deserved to win. It's probably arguably the only game. Maybe Southampton, you could argue that they've gone out and they've dominated and they deserve to win, but they haven't done that enough this season, and they've not built on it. And I mean, they've won 2 games. They won his first 2 games that he was kind of in for, but they haven't won since. They've kept the same formation. It's not worked. It's not looked like working. And then when you lose Almiron, you lose St. Maximin. The system is built around those 2 players. It's built around Wilson as well, but Wilson got injured against Southampton. And Steve Bruce is refusing at the moment to change it, and he should have changed it against Chelsea. He put Dwight Gale out on the wide, which I know Joe knows a lot about Dwight Gale, and he's played there briefly in the Championship for the Baggies, but he's a striker who deserves to be right in the centre forward, and he'll get you the goals if he gets the chance. How is he going to get the chance if he's out on the wide? And he was asked about this after the West Brom game, and he said, we didn't want to play Andy Carroll or Dwight Gale because we'd have to change the system. And it's like, well, it's not worked, and it's built around 3 players who you don't have, and you've got to. I'm not a football manager, but you've got to adapt to the situation you find yourself in. And when you have a striker like Dwight Gale, who, he's not the most prolific, but he is a Premier League striker, and he will get you a chance. He will get you a goal, I think, more than most. You've got to play him to the strengths, and ironically, playing him in his best position will then maybe allow Shelvey to show that kind of ability we all know he's got by pinging the balls to someone who can actually make the most of them. And it is frustration. The Newcastle United fans are very frustrated. It'll be interesting to see what happens against Villa because you can't play. I think you need to play a striker. You you're trying to replace a striker, you've got to replace him with an actual striker, and whether that be Andy Carroll or whether that be Dwight Gale. I'd like to see it being Dwight Gale, but I'm not holding my breath, and I don't think Newcastle United fans are either. But it's a huge game against Villa, because you don't want to lose that one and head down to the Amex in what really is a must-win game. I mean, I thought Sunday was a must-win game. Steve Bruce didn't, but I thought it was. And they're the games you've got to target, and you definitely don't want to be losing against Villa and heading down at Brighton. But Scott, how important is it to build momentum-wise? I think this is something maybe Brighton and Newcastle and West Brom have all lacked, is building on positive results. Newcastle have had a couple of good performances, since the turn of the year, but they've not built on it. Brighton look like they're in the same boat, but Fulham have had this good run and they seem to keep on building. How important is that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from they're getting not always the result they necessarily want, but they're getting a good performance. They're picking up the odd point here and there, and that's growing into 3 points. But I think it's really mirrored with how the team is developing at the same time. So Fulham have had a good defence for quite a while now, but they kind of had that back five and that offered extra security, and then they moved to the back four. But they're still getting better, and I think they're at a point now where the kind of expected goals, I know not everybody likes them, but they're starting to transition where their goals for expected is becoming above their goals against expected. And I think Fulham scored 22 goals this season, so that's a really big moment for them. But I think a lot of people also talk about how Fulham have transformed from the start of the season. I think out of the players who regularly start now, only Harrison Reed started the first game of the season for Fulham. But since October, they've had a group of players where none of them have really got injured. I think Tom Kearney and Terence Kongolo have been out most of the season for Fulham, but they've had this group. Parker can rotate the fullbacks when he wants to. We've got rotation in the midfield where Harrison Reed's probably the main one then, and Gisa and Lamina are kind of swapping around. And they've got this system that they're clearly working on in training, and that's what's the work that's going in every day. And because they're picking up enough points where the kind of media environment around them and most of the fans, it's all really positive. You haven't really got to worry about anybody looking in at you. You can just get on with your job. And I think when you've got the likes of, sorry to go back to Newcastle again, but things happening like last week, that goes around supporters, but there'll be WhatsApp groups of players at different teams laughing about stuff like that. And I say things like that, seeing how things are falling apart, that's going to give the likes of Newcastle a boost. You talked about Mitrovic. I'm sure that he has a couple of people he knows at the club, and he's probably feeling a lot better about being at Fulham right now, I imagine, even if things aren't quite working out.
Rich, I mean, a bit like Scott Parker at Fulham, I guess, is that Graham Potter has this identity at Brighton, but is it coming to a stage where some fans are maybe thinking you've got to change this to get the results? It's nice to watch, but the points aren't coming. So at some point, and obviously this will be based on the next couple of performances and results, does a change have to come in terms of style just to make sure, that they get the points to survive?
Well, yeah, it's a good point because so just to kind of bring up a certain player. So Neil Maupay is the club's top scorer with 7 goals. He's in terms of his expected goals, it's around 11 or 12. But also just the backup options as well. Danny Welbeck, Aaron Conley, they're below their expected levels. So in terms of changing their style, I don't know if Potter will do it because he hasn't really changed it all season, apart from teams who really kind of come at you and then leave the spaces, which Brighton sometimes do well to exploit. But in terms of actually changing the style of play, I can't see it. He might change the personnel. And so I just wrote an article today about a guy called Florin Andoni, who was a bit of an outcast, but now he's coming back. And the reaction from fans is just like, get him in, get him in. But I think it's more just they're just craving something different from what is currently happening. I don't actually know if he'll be the answer to their problems, because there's also Percy Tau and Andy Zakiri, other strikers. But yeah, it's I can't see him changing his style for the time being. But I do think they need to be a bit more pragmatic. But Potter Ball I think that's the philosophy that he's sticking with, and that's not changing anytime soon.
Portable, I like the sound of that. Just before I get you guys to give me your final predictions, and I'm going to pop a league table up on the screen, and this is how I see it going. These predictors, you change your results, don't you, every single time? Sorry, Joe. West Brom there. For those listening later on the podcast, it goes Southampton in 13th, Brighton 14th, Palace 15th, 16th is Burnley, 17th Fulham, 32 points, 18th Newcastle, 31. Then Sheffield United on 18, and 20th lie West Brom.
I must have to correct you very quickly, Andrew, in that we actually already have 18 points.
Yeah, I was going to say,
do you know
we
what?
might finish joint bottom.
They lose a point,
hasn't it? Sorry, yes, you have. Do you know what it is? I did this predictor before that game against Newcastle. I think that's what it is. But I still believe West Brom are going to finish bottom.
Thanks very much. Our goal difference would have us anchored down there anyway. So in such a scenario.
Do you know, I was too busy checking that the points were right for Fulham in terms of what they've got on the board at the moment. So I do apologise. That is the beauty of live broadcast. Joe, how do you see the season panning out then? Which three teams are going down?
Sheffield United, of course. I had Albion to finish 17th before the season started, really through hope more than anything else. I do think that there's a long way back from here. Regrettably, I'm going to have to say that they will slip back into the Championship. I really hate to say it because I'm very fond of the club as a neutral, but I really struggling to see Newcastle stay up because I do think that if it does come down to that last game, I really fancy Fulham. I think Fulham have put a run together in the last couple of months that I can see, especially with Parker at the helm and the players they've got. I can just see them continuing that for the rest of the season. I think Newcastle could be in a little bit of trouble.
Scott?
Yeah, I think when I did the same predictor, my league table didn't look too dissimilar. And it had it coming down to that Newcastle-Fulham game on the last day. I think what will be really interesting for that last day is the fact the fans are back. Obviously, that's going to be great, and there's going to be a huge bonus for Fulham there to have support. But I just think in those nervy moments in games where fans haven't been there recently, and you just get that kind of air of tension, I just wonder how that'll impact the game. And obviously, with it being Fulham fans there, that'll probably impact Fulham more, whether it be one way or the other. But I think they're good at the minute. Says Fulham to stay up and Newcastle to go down with West Brom and Sheffield United.
And Rich?
I am, Sheffield United bottom. I think, sorry, Joe, West Brom. And then, I just think they're kind of those injuries for Newcastle, that trio of Wilson, Almiron and St. Maximin. I think that's just a huge blow. And I don't know, I just feel because Wilson may not come back straight away firing. So that's always a worry when you've got an injury. So I think he'll be Sheffield United 20th, West Brom 19th, and then Newcastle 18th. But I think it will be very close.
I like how Joe got an apology there, but I did. Thanks.
Sorry.
It's because you've got to travel all that way. That's what it is. You don't want to be travelling all the way to the north. Them away days.
Sorry,
I think,
God, that's a journey and a half, isn't it, in a couple of weeks?
but it's a beautiful part of the world. Well, sorry, it was vice versa. Down to Brighton, I've never been, but I'm sure it is. There'll be Lee Ryder heading down there. I think just Newcastle fans are just lacking confidence. But the point is that they are above Brighton. They do have a point more than Fulham. So it just takes one result to hopefully galvanise. But like you guys have mentioned, there's so many elements at the moment playing against Newcastle. Fulham's momentum. I think Brighton play really good football and they dominate sometimes, and it's just not come off. And I was watching that game against Leicester. I was just thinking, goodness me, if they play this way against Newcastle, in the muddle that Newcastle in at the moment, I can see it being a similar score to how it was earlier in the season. From Newcastle point of view, I hope I'm wrong, and I hope I'm proved wrong with my league table, even with the dodgy points tally I had for West Brom there. But guys, thank you for joining. It's been a pleasure to chat to you guys, and I hope you guys watching and listening later enjoy the discussion. And Unfortunately, two of us are going to be in the relegation zone come the end of the season. And we'd love to hear what you guys think, you guys watching and listening. So please do get in touch via whoever writes for your team, and we'll be happy to kind of respond and share our thoughts as well. So once again, thank you for tuning in.